Um, yes, Megan, I am recording. So y'all can revisit this later. Have a good time. Oh, Chris is back. Let's let him in. Lit. Um, so all right, like we've been saying, and like you guys saw on the schedule, I'm kind of leading out a talk on race and creation care. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen of like the 7 million screens I have going right now. All right. Can you see like my full presentation? Cool. I'm just like asking Melinda because she's like right over there, so that works. Um, so yeah, so we're on race and creation care. Um, this is a topic that's like super, super near and dear to me. It's something that I've spent like years, like a couple years of my life, um, just thinking about and talking about. And so it's something like really close and personal to me that I just really, really love sharing about. So I'm excited to talk about it with you guys. So if I can figure out how to advance to the next slide there, wow, technology. So a little bit of background on creation care. Some of y'all know I led me and then two other people, Daniela Garrigos and Kelly Sherrill and we led a whole large group on creation care for Davis InterVarsity sometime in winter quarter. And so just some background on creation care. It's foundationally a biblical idea that is founded in Genesis. And that kind of begins in the Garden of Eden. God kind of tells Adam, like, hey, like, this is yours, like, tend to it. You have dominion over the earth. Tend and care for the land here. And so some of the stuff I am pulling from another talk that I saw from a way different time. And so this is a talk, and I'll link the video like a little bit after I'm done talking because I don't have it with me right now. But what this video is talking about were these 4 words that are found in Genesis that relate to creation, relate to each other, and like relates us to God. And so that first word is tov ma'od. And you can see that in Genesis 1, like verse 31. And that's kind of like that when God finishes creating things and says like, it was very good. And that tov ma'od doesn't just mean very good, but it means forcefully good. It is kind of an overreaching idea of it's not just like, oh, these things like look great together, but it is forcefully and like abundantly and almost like aggressively good. And this doesn't just relate us to God, it relates us to each other and relates us to creation as well. And so when God created everything, he looked at how everything relates to each other and said it was forcefully good. So that's a word I want to highlight that's really important in this idea of creation care. The next one is salem, and that's also found in Genesis 1, and it just means like image, or like in Greek, it's that word for icon. And it's the idea that like we bear God's image and all of his creation bears his image, bears his salem. And so I hope you can see where that's going in the idea of creation, care, and race. But we'll preview into that. So the third word is radah, and that is in a couple different places in Genesis 1 and 2. And it's in that classic kind of argument a lot of people not in favor of creation care use to kind of justify their actions. And it's that word that is used, and in our translation, it normally says like dominion. But radah is more of a godly dominion. It is a perfect, idealized, like godly dominion that we see. And even beyond just the word dominion, it means to serve and protect. So this idea that God gave us dominion over the land, but reality, like God made us to serve and protect the land and all of his creation. So that's another word that I want to highlight that'll come into play later. And then the fourth one is demuth, and that's also in Genesis 1, and it means likeness. So it's kind of like relates to Salem, but instead of just having God's image, we're made kind of in his likeness. But that also comes with, then we are not God. We are like God, but we are not him. And so in talks about racism and creation care, you see people in positions of power, people who are historically oppressors, elevate themselves to almost this God status. And so as we share the good news, it is also good news for them that they are not God, that they don't have this responsibility on them and pardon on them, but rather that they can enjoy kind of this freedom and this freedom from responsibility that God has kind of over all of creation. And because ultimately the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and that includes all of us, and that includes the earth itself. So he gave us dominion over it. He gave us radah, but he didn't make us gods. He didn't make us equal to himself over all of creation, all of the earth. So that's kind of like foundations and backgrounds of creation care. And so when we see creation care and social justice kind of working together is just honestly like everywhere, but I picked out a few of these things, and there's also like thousands of articles, so many that I was researching and looking into just for my own personal wants, but also for this talk. And so I think it doesn't necessarily always go without saying, but I hope some of us would be aware that historically poorer neighborhoods are made up largely of minority groups, like, and disproportionately so. Like in the US, there's a lot of Hispanics and African Americans. Oh, the typo on my slides, but it'd be like that sometimes. So historically, Hispanics and African Americans make up those poor neighborhoods. And so it's also not a coincidence that huge pollutants and like chemical power plants and different sort of air pollutant, water pollutants like are built near those neighborhoods. And these pollutants are linked with asthma, cardiovascular problems, cancers. And it's a huge problem in just these socioeconomic gradients of communities. So we see historically power plants going up near poor neighborhoods. Those poor neighborhoods are made up of Black and Hispanic people. And now they have just more health problems just by living where they live, by how our systems are structured. And because of that, especially in this time of COVID, we are seeing higher rates of African Americans and Hispanics dying because they have these underlying health problems. They're in poor neighborhoods. They don't have equal access to all of these things that we might have and that we're privileged enough to have. And so that's a huge part of creation care as well, is caring about these communities. And so there's a concept called the climate gap. And it's the idea that there's a huge disparity, and this disparity in climate and climate change hurts minorities and poor people the most. And so you see like mortality rates from heat waves are twice as high among African Americans in LA compared to the other residents. And that's like not by coincidence. It's not because Black people have some weird genetic disposition to heat waves that will just like kill them instantly. They're historically from the equator region, you know? And so that idea isn't where that comes from. It's because they're put in poor neighborhoods with pollutants and like unequal access to things. And so a lot of these things come up from a book that I've read called Loving the Least of These. and it's addressing a changing environments by Dorothy Borse. If y'all want the PDF for that, hit me up. I will send it to you. It's great. It's pretty short, and it talks about like the disparity in like these poor neighborhoods. It talks about the actual changing climate, kind of the science behind it, like what we're seeing in changing climate, and then also our response as Christians and kind of where we see these two intersect. And so all of these things kind of accumulate into this idea of, the gospel. The gospel is good news, all right? But like, how can you say, oh, the gospel is good news for these poor people in minority groups when they're being oppressed, when they're suffering, when they're hurting? When we say, oh, yay, like Jesus comes to save you, like all of these things, and yet they're dying. It doesn't always sound like good news when we put it that way. And this kind of relates to Matt's talk on empire as well. Are we teaching and are we preaching a gospel that is for justice and against empire? Because empire encompasses this huge climate gap, it encompasses socioeconomic status, and it encompasses just minority groups dying at the hands of the system. And so all of these things are in empire and not in the kingdom. Not in the kingdom that we want to be a part of anyway. And so the gospel is good news for all people, but also for all of creation. And so if people, society, and creation are then part of God's redemptive plan, then they need to be a part of our mission as well. And so, little advance. There we go. So I think we've all heard of the Great Commission. It is Jesus' kind of command to us to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. And there's a lot of different things that go into making disciples of all nations. And another book that my pastor actually sent me once called Integral Mission and the Great Commission. And it's kind of under that, it's the 5 Marks of Mission by Chris Wright. You also want the link to that? I got it. So he kind of pulls out these 5 different things as part of mission and as an integral parts of mission. And those are like evangelism, teaching, compassion, justice, and creation care. And so none of these things should be exclusive. You can't necessarily have one without the other. And doing one on its own is an incomplete view of mission and God's redemptive plan for us. And so evangelism is actually such a key point to all of these things. You might have heard of just the classic kind of mission scenario, white savior complexy style of I'm going to go and evangelize to these people. I'm going to bring Jesus to them. And so those things, or like that attitude, is devoid of these other aspects of mission, which is why it leaves it so hollow and so unfulfilling, and leaves it with a more empire view than a kingdom view. But instead, we want mission that incorporates evangelism into teaching, into compassion, into justice, and into creation care. Those things is what makes the good news to all people, rather than good news for white heterosexual males in America. And so all of these things like kind of work together. And so I just have a few notes. Sorry if it's kind of scattered. That's kind of how my brain is a lot. But we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of shalom. And shalom means kind of in its like Hebrew form, like a universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight. And I just saw that definition and I was like, ooh, that's so beautiful for a picture of what shalom means. And I know a lot of the times we hear, oh, shalom means peace, means hello, goodbye. It's like the Hebrew aloha, like not really. It's more than that. And so, like, despite that being kind of a common narrative, shalom is a lot deeper than all of these things. And shalom was essential to God's creative plan. And it was present in the Garden of Eden. And in the garden, we saw kind of plants of all kinds, animals of all kinds, Adam and Eve kind of living together in peace, in shalom, with their environment, and also in shalom with God, who was with them, walking with them in the garden. And all of those things like came together for a reason in the garden, and fell apart when sin entered in for a reason. Holistic shalom, like as we see it and as it was supposed to be in the garden, isn't possible anymore because of sin, and because of the brokenness that entered into our world. And as much as that sucks, and I know it can seem hopeless to me a lot too, as I kind of think about my own walk of like, well, if I can never achieve these things again, why should I bother to try and do that? But shalom is also a part of God's restorative plan and God's redemptive plan for creation. And shalom will be restored on this earth in Jesus' new creation that he makes when he turns all these wrongs right and brings justice to all the injustices we see. And I think something that I overlooked a lot in my walk was kind of like the classic prayer that Jesus taught his disciples to pray, the one that we always say at communion kind of stuff, the Lord's Prayer. But there's like a reason why Jesus taught his disciples to pray in this way. And it's a lot of that I find in the line of God's will, like, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so despite shalom not being able to be present in our earth as it was meant to be, as it was supposed to be, as was God's original plan, we should still be trying to bring shalom and like bring reconciliation and redemption to the areas that we can bring it to in our lives and in like the world around us. And there was a talk for another Ivy Justice program. We've had a ton recently, just like on the national level, and it's been amazing. So one that I've been a part of has been talking about, we had like a whole week-long orientation that was crazy and long and like filled with like hour and a half long videos every single day. But one of them was talking about our money and how to use our wealth to kind of pursue justice. And this idea that holistic shalom dismantles oppressive economic structures. But this idea of holistic shalom doesn't just stop at the economy, because it's holistic, means encompasses everything. And so the holistic shalom that we should be pursuing on earth as it is in heaven dismantles oppressive structures that include economic structures, racial structures, social structures, and environmental structures that we see in our world today, where we've kind of just missed the mark as a society in building up our culture and building up our nations in a way that naturally oppresses people, in a way that is convenient for one group and life or death for the other. And so environmental justice is totally intertwined with social justice, with racial justice, with pursuing equality in all forms. And so some places that I have seen that in my walk and have read about and heard other people talk about, obviously recognizing the indigenous people of this land. And us taking their land wasn't like a non-personal thing. It was a personal, like, yes, Josh, I see you trying to figure that out on the side. Yeah. It was personal, and it was racialized, and it was fueled by hate. And the way that we then reclaimed their land and after we took it from them was broken naturally. And it didn't have this idea of shalom incorporated into it as we rebuilt and repurposed the stolen land. And kind of what I mean by that was Native people, like when they used the land, they used all parts of it. They had this kind of idea of like more, I'm going to say the word holistic probably like a million times, so bear with me. But like they had an idea of like holistic agriculture that incorporated kind of different kinds of trees and crops, and they would have like an upper story of taller trees that would be fruitful and that would shade and protect kind of a lower canopy of other crops that would also, you know, contribute to the soil health and contribute to kind of like a natural kind of pesticide, and would also like be its own ecosystem. But when we took their land from them and repurposed it, it was inherently racist. It was the idea that what they did wasn't good and was what they kind of saw as like barbaric or savage, and what they had to do was better. And that caused just a cascade of environmental problems and racial injustice. So what we replaced it with were monocultures, which is the idea of like, I'm just going to grow one thing in this entire area. And I'm going to be real with y'all. I don't think the Garden of Eden just had corn. Like, I'm saying it didn't. Like, okay. And so the idea that we took their land in the name of religion, in the name of racism, and repurposed it to just grow one thing is as far from biblical as as we can get at this point. And so with that, we have built our country. And with those ideas and with that system in mind, we have built our nation. But that's obviously not what God has in store for us or what God had intended. And this, man, sorry, I have so many notes on here, and it's just like, I forget like one thing and I read my notes, I'm like, that's also crazy. What I just read was the Dakota Access Pipeline. And if you don't know what that is, it's a giant like oil pipeline that they're gonna build and like put underground that spans like 3 or 4 states, and is built over indigenous land. And so we see this idea of colonial America isn't gone, this idea of stealing land for our own purposes that are inherently evil and also not in line with environmental justice, is still going on today. And so like these concepts and these stories aren't what God intended for us. God intended for there to be shalom between us and each other, and between us and creation, and between us and God. And so the Bible begins and ends with creation. In Genesis, we see God creating everything, the earth and everything in it and everyone on it. And we see Revelation end with the new creation of what God is going to redeem out of this earth and out of this world. So we see the earth as God first created it in shalom. Then we see it getting broken by sin. But then we see it getting rebuilt in shalom and in hope and in love. And so it's these things that we want to pursue. We want to pursue shalom in our world around us. And I think it's especially relevant right now with the Black Lives Matter movements, with Indigenous people still being displaced and hurt and going missing, and with climate change wreaking havoc on our world. Like I said, it's not a coincidence that all of these things greatly affect each other. It's not a coincidence that climate change disproportionately kills more minority groups than not. It's not a coincidence that poor neighborhoods were built around power plants and pollutants. And it's not a coincidence that we continually displace and steal Native people's lands. None of this is how it's supposed to be. And so with that, I know that's like kind of heavy, and also I like low-key don't even remember half of what I said, so sorry. That's why it's recorded. But with that, I think I wanted to ask some of these discussion questions. I don't know how many, there's 13 of us, so you might want to go into breakout rooms for this, but just these 3 questions are: where can you see the brokenness in nature around you? So whether it's in your city, in your community, what you kind of have had experience with in your classes, yeah, like just where can you see it? Like I kind of offered some examples of like monoculture, agriculturalism. That's somewhere I can see brokenness in nature and in our systems. And then I want you to kind of put yourself in the place of someone else. This might not be all of our experiences. We might not all come from, or we don't all come from the same backgrounds or the same kind of lived experience. And so kind of put yourself in one of those poor, underprivileged neighborhoods where you might have a power plant built near you and you grow up with asthma and lung problems and maybe even heart problems. And now look around you, and where do you see the brokenness? How is that brokenness that you saw just before as yourself amplified in the eyes of these people? How do you think it hurts more as a minority group? How do you think it hurts more in these poor neighborhoods? And what are ways that you can bring shalom into this? Where can you use your position and your love and your faith to bring shalom into these areas of brokenness? And that also doesn't have to just encompass like a garden or like a nature like in its physical sense. I think a huge understanding that I have had of creation and my relationship with God is we worship God by caring for creation. It is kind of like we were talking about in the Bible study, like it's a fruit that we receive, and it's a fruit that like comes from our faith, kind of this idea of works, and without works, like our faith is dead, but also from our faith in God and from, his love, we do these works. And so we worship God and we show our love to God by caring for our creation. And we also love our neighbor by caring for creation. This earth that we all share, all of the damage is felt all around us. It's not insular, it's not isolated, but it is overreaching. And we're all on this one giant rock floating through space together. And if part of it goes down, we're all going down. And so with this in mind, with this idea of we love our neighbor by caring for and loving our creation as well, What are ways that you think you can bring shalom into creation, into people, into the earth, into your relationship with God? Where are those areas that you can do that in? So Beth, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Sorry if that was a lot for y'all. I'm just now getting the chat. Oh, thank you for the PowerPoint flex. Oh, dang. I have no idea what you guys are referring to when you're saying that's good, because that happened so long ago. Yes, you should have the fire department on speed dial anyway. Either way, it's just 3 numbers, Josh. So I think you're fine. Ooh, Josh. Yeah, people do still be saying go back to your own country, which is hilarious, because I'm like, cool, are we all going to go back to Europe then, or like where we came from when we colonized the United States? I don't think so. Kinghorn, crazy documentary. Another documentary plug is Biggest Little Farm. So Melinda and I watched that together. I'll type it in the chat. It is, if you want like a really good feel good, but also like rip your heart out documentary. It's really good. It's free on Hulu. It incorporates that idea of holistic agriculture, of every single crop that they had feeds and benefits each other, all the animals, even the ones that you might see as pests, like gophers and snails, like they all have a purpose and they all have a place in God's community and in his creation and in helping it thrive. And so super, super cool documentary, highly recommend. Anderson, like you're saying, pesticide use in predominantly Latino populations, it's huge. And they're also the ones, working in those fields. They're also the ones having just greater exposure to these things. They have like the highest exposure to just like nitrates and zinc and just terrible particles in the air that like you wouldn't want to breathe as a person. And so like, why would you force other people to do that? So those are slight tangents, but it looks like there's 13 of us. So Beth, I don't know how you want to split up these breakout rooms. I will retype these questions in the chat for us. So Beth, you want to work on that? I'm going to mute myself and type these questions in the chat really fast.
Great. Sounds good. I'm putting about 3 per room. Does that sound okay? Nice. Yeah. And maybe what I'll have Nahlia do after this is she actually named different books and resources to kind of grow in this. And so we'll make sure to just distribute that to you, because I think that's great even beyond this space, right? There's a lot of other ways to keep learning. And thanks so much, Nahlia. This is solid content. Yep. And how long do you want folks in breakout rooms?
I would say maybe like 5 to like 7 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, if y'all feel like that's not enough time, speak up or forever hold your peace.
I'll put 7 just because, we got some good questions and I want to give ample time to respond.
Cool. Wow, I didn't even get to drink my coffee that whole time.
Are your questions all set?
Yes, all 3 of them are in the chat. Hopefully y'all can see that, yeah.
I'll see y'all in about 7 minutes.
Hello.
Oh my gosh, hi Queen.
Wait, what the? Oh my gosh.
The algorithm got us all together.
How did you do that?
Then I'll start my video.
Like, who's these hoes? I don't know who they are. They're probably Nahlia's friends.
Wow.
I was kind of hoping to like meet your friends though. Well, I was
No, I wanted to just like talk to you.
Okay,
you're doing amazing.
Honestly,
this is the Lord's work.
Oh, okay. I was like
I
listening
was like,
to
what's
my friend
happening?
Melinda. No, my friend Melinda's in this room too.
Hi,
But
Melinda.
yeah. Well, she can't
You're
hear
doing
now.
amazing,
Thanks, Melinda.
sweetie.
I'm
Yeah,
impressed.
I like high-key need feedback because I have no idea how I did, and it felt like I threw a lot of really disconnected information at y'all that like made no
No.
sense, and I'm like, here, and I'm like,
Mm-mm.
okay.
It was
No, no.
awesome. It made
Okay.
like perfect sense.
Okay,
Because
like,
everything is connected. If you have like, I don't think it takes much deep thought to realize, oh, all these things like connect and affect each other. Nice Dutch Bros mug.
thanks. Got it at a thrift store.
I
Um,
appreciate towards the end when you were getting ready to pose the question of like, make sure people can visualize things in their town, because I don't think people like understand, or they think it's a like, oh, that's not my issue. Like, I'm not the one like being mean to these people or whatever. But then once they
Yeah.
start picturing the neighborhoods, they're like, oh,
Yeah, like
That's
That's
the
the
whole
hardest part about
idea.
serving the kingdom at all is being like, oh, that's not near me. Oh, this, I don't know how to serve in that way.
Yeah, so that's like why I wanted to highlight it too, because I'm like, all the time, do I think like this is isolated to like specifically, like big cities with like the ghetto, like stuff like that. And I'm like, but it's not exclusive to
We
one
live in the
area.
Central Valley.
Exactly.
That's a
Like
big
a
area.
huge agricultural hub. And so obviously like I see the effects of agriculture and like see how damaging it is both like to our land and like to the people who have to like work in those fields. So
yeah, I get
What
really
can we do?
upset. Oh, my
Go,
God.
Elizabeth.
Well, I was just thinking like when you were giving the different examples, I was trying to think like in our neighborhoods, and I started getting mad because something that comes up a lot in our young adults group is like when they talk about the different neighborhoods, they're like, oh, that place is scary, or oh, that, and I'm like, there's people in this young adult.
Born into the situation, you never had a choice in like what family you were born into, what neighborhood you were born into. You never had a choice.